From beautiful downtown Millheim, in the smack-dab center of the Keystone State, this is Lou Bryson with Seen Through a Glass, the podcast that's mostly about food and drink in central Pennsylvania. Welcome to episode 32, the Meat Lab at Penn State. One thing you learn when you move to central Pennsylvania, something you damn sure know if you grew up here, is that the Pennsylvania State University, universally known as Penn State, looms large in almost every aspect of life hereabouts. The road system, driven by Penn State. Businesses for miles around, dependent on Penn State. The real estate market throughout Center County hangs on every decision at the university. The town itself is named State College. And of course, when it's seen through a glass, the restaurant scene, and most definitely the bar scene, are all about Penn State. We think and talk about the university all the time. Today, we know of Penn State as a huge research university with a top engineering school, a noted and well-endowed business school, a strong pre-med program, a preeminent meteorology program, and football. I think they play football there. But when Penn State University was founded in 1863, it was an agricultural college, one of the first of the so-called land-grant schools. And if you pause even a moment and think, you'll remember that yeah, there are cows all over the place, with meadows running right up to the stadium. Drive out past Pine Grove Mills and you'll see acres and acres of Penn State fields. As well as cows, they raise turkeys, hogs, and bees. Pennsylvanians benefit directly from these programs, which are designed to improve agriculture in the state. Here in Center County, we benefit on a more individual level. We can buy ice cream and milk at the Berkey Creamery on campus, for instance. And the focus of this episode is that we can also buy meat at the Penn State Butcher Block, the student-run meat store on campus, right in the shadow of Beaver Stadium. I have a great interview for you with Dr. Jonathan Campbell from the Department of Animal Science at Penn State. We talk about Penn State's responsibilities as a land-grant college, the farms around campus, the Butcher Block retail store, well, a lot of things really, because Dr. Campbell is a good talker, has a lot to tell us, including answers to some questions some of you submitted on Facebook. We'll have to do that again. It actually worked out pretty well. And like a big roast or a juicy pile of fresh grilled steaks, this interview is a delicious main course for our podcast meal. However, what I don't have for you this time are the salad, sides, and soup. You may also notice that this is not the town profile I promised you last time. This episode is a good one, but it's a bit of a stopgap for reasons that were somewhat beyond my control. The past 2 weeks have been a bit hectic here, as we did finally move back into our Millheim house and started unpacking. I just went over to our storage units and picked up a load of kitchen stuff and glassware this afternoon. Sure could have used some of this stuff 2 weeks ago for the Burns Night dinner, and this was supposed to happen back in December when I took 2 weeks off for the podcast. Oh well. Sadly, I'm also handling the unsettlingly swift demise of my Uncle Don, whom some of you may remember from stories I've told in print or on social media. Don was my wingman on many brewery research trips when I was doing the Pennsylvania and New York breweries books, including a marathon session in Buffalo, New York that took us to at least 10 bars and breweries and lasted till almost 3 a.m. I also took Don along on a trip to Dusseldorf and Cologne back in, I think, 2005. Even though he was about 20 years older than me, in his mid-60s, and didn't speak a single word of German other than beer, I had a hard time keeping up. Don was a quiet, implacable force of nature when it came to food and drink. Thanksgiving dinner at my grandmother May's was never over until Don pushed away his plate and reached for a piece of celery, his usual end-of-meal palate cleanser before pie was served. He made his own hot pepper wine, which was served to unsuspecting guests at the hunting camp he and his friends had near Dublin Gap in Cumberland County. There were still 4 bottles of his hot pepper wine in the back of his small liquor cabinet at the retirement home when my Aunt Alice told me to go ahead and clean it out last week. If you're ever over to the house and I offer you a glass of wine, you might want to give it a good nosing before trying it. Alice and Don didn't have any kids, so I've been filling in, running down to Lancaster to visit, to support Aunt Alice and get some chores done for her, generally handle stuff that she can't. Don's about to cash his check, I'm afraid, and it's a tough time. So I didn't really have the time or the spirit to go do bar and restaurant visits in the towns I was looking at for profiles, but I did have this interview waiting. I was planning on making it the centerpiece of an episode on local butcher shops, but that's going to have to wait. Maybe I'll talk to a hog farmer for that episode instead. Anyway, my apologies. It's still a good interview, and we're going to get to it. But first, here's what I'm drinking today. Last episode, I told you we were going to be doing an informal Burns Night dinner. Well, actually more a Burns Night-themed birthday party for two good friends. Burns Night being what it is, we dug into the Scotch whiskey pretty deep. I opened up the cellar and we had a Johnny Walker Platinum, some 15-year-old Glengoyne, a Lefroy Kirchhoff bottling, and a 31-year-old Glenfiddich single barrel. They were all good, but the next morning, the one I remembered most fondly was a simple bottle of Bowmore 12-year-old. Bowmore Distillery is on Islay, the renowned island off Scotland's southwest coast, home to fabled distilleries like Lefroy and Lagavulin and Ardbeg, Kalila, Bunnahabhain, Bruichladdich, and Bowmore. Bowmore sits right on the shore of Loch Indal, a sea loch that opens onto the North Atlantic Ocean. When a gale blows up in the ocean, those waves beat against the seawall at the distillery, and spray flies into the courtyard in front of the Bowmore No. 1 vaults, reputed to be the oldest whiskey warehouse in Scotland. I've been to Bowmore. I've turned a few shovels in their malt house, and I've drunk whiskey there, so maybe there's a certain amount of personal preference here. But it's also just a pretty damn good whiskey. Let's have at it. Wow. The very first thing you notice is the smoke. As I said, they have their own malt house. Pete smokes through it there, and that's what you're smelling right off the bat. Actually, I was smelling it before I even picked up the glass. So what is it? There's a certain amount of sweet bonfire there. There is some brininess, a surprising amount of fruit, kind of maybe tart berry, plum, maybe some stewed apple, but a lot of smoke. And it's a clean, sweet smoke. This is not one of your diesel-y or fishnet peat smoke smells. It's pretty clean. Some woody stuff, some leaves. Let's try it and see what it tastes like. So that pretty much recapitulates on the palate. There's a quick hit of almost an ashiness up front that quickly dissipates, and that sweetness comes through. There's a lot of malt in this whiskey. Now, this is a fairly young whiskey at 12 years old, and the immediate thought is to dismiss a younger whiskey as it's just not as good or whatever. But the thing is, the beauty of a younger Scotch whiskey is that you get a lot more influence from the actual spirit, the distillate, and less so from the barrel. So what you're getting here is more smoke, more of that malt and fruit from the fermentation, and that's really coming through here. A lot of smoke, but not overwhelming or killing because of, like I said, this is really more of a clean smoke, more like a bonfire on the beach, as they like to say on Islay, and like to do on Islay. And then there's a finish in which the smoke is more of a framing, and the real finish is about the distillate. It's about the sweet cereal note of the malt. It's about the fruity esters of the fermentation. And that's, it is a young whiskey, and it hits a bit like a young whiskey. And there are things about older whiskeys that people like that I like. But this is this is kind of like my old granddad of Scotch. You can just grab a bottle of this, sit down with some friends, and you're going to enjoy the whiskey, and it's not going to overtake everything. It's just a good glass of whiskey. Might have to have another one of those after the show's over. I did this interview back in December when I talked to Dr. Campbell about baking your holiday ham. We were in a small room in the basement of the meat lab with concrete block walls and a small wooden table. Not ideal conditions for recording, so there's a bit of an echo and the occasional rumble from the table when he tapped it to emphasize a point. It's not thunder, I swear. But the content will likely make you forget all that. So put on your goggles and white coat and follow me into the meat lab. Hey, I'm here with Dr. Jonathan Campbell. He's a meat extension specialist at the meat lab at Penn State. I wanted to talk about butcher shops, and I thought I'd start where things start, where
Fantastic.
People learn to do it.
Look forward to talking about it.
All right. One of the first things I wanted to ask was, you're listed on the PSU website as a meat extension specialist, and it seems like there's a fair amount to unpack in just that title. So can we talk about that? The whole extension program, I remember hearing about that as part of, that's part of the agricultural college mission, right? It is.
It is the main reason why Penn State exists. So Penn State is one of many land grants across the country. And so the land grant mission encompasses teaching undergraduates, research, training graduate students, and then extension or education to the community, outreach to the community, to those industry stakeholders perhaps. And that's my primary role here and one of the many hats that I have here at the university.
How do they get to you? Is that a constant, remember I'm here? That
No.
kind of, oh, okay, good.
No, it's not. So certainly a lot of states will have a county-based system, and Pennsylvania has offices still in every county.
Now, are these agents from, essentially dealt with by Penn State, or is that from the Department of Agriculture?
So it could, they are employees of Penn State.
Wow, okay,
all across the Commonwealth.
Okay.
And their goal could be to, for instance, our family and consumer scientists. They may work with consumers dealing with home canning, or you might have livestock agents that work with cattle producers or sheep producers or swine producers all throughout the Commonwealth.
Okay.
And so we try to have various disciplines all throughout the Commonwealth to help complete some of that outreach mission as part of our land grant system. And our true goal is to really enrich the lives of Pennsylvanians, but also to be kind of, if you will, the translation arm between basic science to practical applied science. And so basic science may be very specific disciplines. They may be difficult for the layperson to understand, and it's important that Extension takes that science-based education and uses it in an applied format so that it can do what part of that mission is, which is to enrich the lives in some way, either to help with a food safety mission, for instance, or help with a disease outbreak. We may have heard in the media about high-path avian influenza.
Oh, right.
And that was a
big
combined
deal.
effort with extension specialists, extension agents, USDA personnel, as well as PDA, or Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, all in an effort to try to combat the spread of that disease.
Well, that was that must have been like an all hands on deck moment.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And those are the reasons why you have extension specialists to help coordinate some of those efforts, even within the Commonwealth, but even across state lines, where you you have border states. Where we border a lot of states.
Right.
Pennsylvania is not a small state. And so when you have disease outbreaks, it may take multiple states involved in borderline cases where you have, say, a farm that's on the border of another state.
When you were saying that, I was thinking, wow, and we really border on a lot of ag states, but they're almost all ag states, aren't they?
They are. They really are. Even New Jersey and New York, which traditionally maybe not be thought of, but there's a lot of agriculture in those states.
I used to live next to the part of New Jersey where they grew a lot of stuff.
They sure do.
Yeah.
You can't pump your own gas, but
better pick your own blueberries. I did have some questions that listeners submitted, and they wanted to know about essentially who are the students at the meat lab? What are they? Is that like a whole 4-year course or?
It is, and so I wouldn't say it's a course per se as much as they actually have a job.
Okay.
They are paid employees of our meat science laboratory.
Okay.
We could not operate without them. They are. It adds value to their time here as a student, but it certainly adds value to our facility. Our students, our farms are fairly unique in the Department of Animal Science. So the meat lab is considered an auxiliary unit in the department, similar to our beef sheep center or our swine center, our poultry center, horse farm, dairy farm, and our white-tailed deer research facility. All of those farms, quote unquote, if you will, they all have a unique quality. Number one, we are very blessed here to have all of our units still very close or on campus.
I was going to ask, are the farms all right here?
They all are right here. We do certainly have other farms throughout the state and throughout the region.
Okay.
As most land grants do, you have other property that the university may own where research is done. For instance, Biglerville, where a lot of fruit research is done.
Oh, okay.
Those are still considered farms, if you will. They may not be animal agriculture farms, but agriculture nonetheless. There's property out towards Rock Springs where a lot of horticulture and plant research, crop research is done. So there are farms off campus, but we're very blessed here to have all of our animal farms, not all of, but the majority of our animal farms very close to campus and technically on campus.
Yeah, I mean, so many people have mentioned the cows, right? I mean, you can always get a picture of the stadium with cows right there.
Yeah, that's very important. And certainly a lot of the Angus herd that is near the hospital and near our beef sheep center, where a lot of people think of as tailgate parking. Those are actually pastures that you're parking in, so we do a lot more than just tailgate at this university. We're certainly very expert in the tailgating.
Indeed.
Scene.
And I imagine there's a certain amount of intersection there with the meat lab and tailgating.
Hopefully not. But yeah, there is tailgating right beside our facility.
Wow. And I should mention, the facility is right beside the stadium. How did that happen? It just kind of happened?
Well, we were here first.
Okay. That's a great reason.
And if you really look, think about where the stadium used to be over near Rec Hall.
Okay.
This building was built where there was a lot of farmland and tree groves and fruit trees and pasture land. And everything built up around it. The baseball stadium was not here, which is adjacent to us. What is now the athletic administration building, formerly the Center County Welcome.
The hospital? Is that?
Hospital's fairly new.
Yeah.
And so all of that was not here in the 50s when this building was built. So
it is kind of cool that because of those farms, there's a lot of green around here.
There is a lot of green.
Yeah, that's pretty great. People wondered if they're working at the butcher block, could they be any year in college? Or
they could be.
Okay.
Yeah. We actually had a fairly unique situation this fall. We had what's known as a matriculated minor, which means we had someone who's 17 years of age actually enter college, and they didn't turn 18 until, say, late September, early October, where their birthday fell. And that was a unique situation for us because there's some limitations on what a minor, a quote minor, can and cannot do working for a facility like this. They can't handle a knife, for instance. They can't lift more than, say, 10 pounds. And although this person was certainly capable of doing all those activities by law, they cannot. And so you have to take into consideration some of that, but most of our students are, I would say, between the age of 18 and their early 20s.
Okay.
And they could be any class at the university. They are not all animal science majors, although a lot of them are. We certainly have other ag disciplines within the College of Agriculture, and we've even had students that come from outside the college that either maybe have a farm background or grew up wanting to learn more about food processing or meat processing. We've had engineers. You don't think of that as an activity, but process engineers make a lot of the equipment that we utilize.
I have learned that engineering gets into a lot more things than I thought it did.
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. So that gives us a good entree, if you would, into the butcher block. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. So it's certainly not the primary reason why we were here.
Right. I mean, it's on the other hand, for a lot of the listeners, it is that public face.
It is.
Yeah.
And so our Friday meat sales are simply a way to fund the program.
Oh, okay.
Other than a lot of the utilities, from a budgetary standpoint, the Meat Lab gets $0 to operate, and so we're kind of entrepreneurial in the sense of keeping our teaching and extension, some of our extension programming going. That helps to fund positions. It funds some of the student activity. It helps to support the teaching, research, and extension activities that happen at this location. One of the downfalls to that is, unlike the creamery, for instance. So if you've ever had Penn State ice cream, there's a lot of students working in that sales area. But the creamery is a nice facility because they have separate production facilities and separate teaching and research facilities all throughout that food science building. Uh-huh. Whereas we have a shared space. And so we have to really be mindful about scheduling and when things happen. What sort of activities are ongoing. Taking a basic meat science course through our Animal Science 207 class, which one of my colleagues, Dr. Ed Mills, teaches and has for many years. That is required for all undergraduates wanting a degree in animal science to take. So we would have at any one point in time somewhere between 100 to 150 undergraduates come through this facility within a given year.
I was wondering how many students we were talking about. Okay.
Yeah, and then certainly you have other courses. Food science has an advanced processing class that's required of all food science. It's a 400 level class, and so all food science students would come here every spring to take that class. And then other classes would utilize this facility throughout the year, as well as the extension activities that we would have.
Now, what opportunities are there here for, I don't know, like a local butcher shop? I mean, is that just we have a question, or is it something where they might come here to learn how to do a different process? Or
that's a great question, and the answer to that is both of those that you mentioned. So there might be some both lecture and hands-on training that would happen in a workshop or a short course. Every spring we host the Pennsylvania Association of Meat Processors annual convention, and the pre-convention on Thursday and Friday is all right here at the Meat Lab, where all meat processors and butchers that are wanting to learn more about that, we'll have an educational session, hands-on session, as well as lectures from various speakers all across the United States, just to talk about modern topics in meat processing. Are there regulatory changes that may be coming, and try to keep a good educational activity associated with that conference.
Okay. Now, I have to ask because it's driving me crazy because it's just what I do. I have a thing about words.
Sure.
Difference between a meat processor and a butcher?
Nothing.
Is it scale? Oh, no, okay. All right.
Nothing. Technically, when the act of butchery would be to go through harvesting livestock and then processing. But meat processing encompasses that activity plus further processing. So, we in your holiday segment we talked about ham curing, and so that is meat processing.
Okay.
Making hot dogs, making fermented snack items. Those are types of activities that meat processing would encompass all of those things.
Okay. So
you may use those words interchangeably, but I say meat processor because I deal with all of those particular activities when I help someone who has a need.
Okay. So you're dealing with the whole range of things.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Local butchers. Let's get down into the level where my listeners are.
Perfect.
Okay. Do you have advice for people on how to identify a good local butcher?
That's actually a very tough question, and it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you simply, as a consumer, trying to identify a local butcher, or as a livestock producer trying to identify some place to take?
I hadn't even thought about that.
So if it's just from the consumer side, certainly buying local or somewhere near you is really about developing relationships.
Right.
And when you go to develop a relationship, it's not like going to a big box store. And that is really part of the experience of going to a local small shop, regardless of what they're selling. If it's a local coffee shop as opposed to going to a chain coffee shop, those are the types of activities where you get to know who's working there. You develop a relationship. Hopefully they have some education in what they're trying to share with their consumers, regardless of what they're trying to sell. And so that's really one of the key differences that I would say. If you can find someplace within, say, a 30 or 40-minute drive where you identify with the individuals and you're made to feel welcome and you receive a little bit of education along the way, they have great products to sell as well. And so don't be afraid to talk to them and start to develop that relationship would be my best advice to those consumers.
Yeah, you really do have to put a little bit of work in it yourself.
You do.
Yeah, whereas in a supermarket, you just go, you look at the price, you look at the weight, okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I love that part.
But certainly with meat products, consumers are going to purchase with their eyes first. And so if you walk into a place and you're not happy with what you see, you're probably not going to buy a lot of product there or buy anything at all.
So that's actually, that was something I was just thinking about that was bugging me. If it doesn't look right, is it probably not right or?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So for instance, meat color is a big topic. And just because meat, if it turns brown, we assume that it is no longer good, and that's not accurate at all.
It's a pretty quick surface reaction.
It could be,
okay,
and it's also a function of the type of lighting that processor would use. So if you have too bright of a light or too hot of a light or both, that could really change the color really fast of that product. Another example, and that's just simply changing the chemistry of what's happening inside that fresh meat product. If you stack meat on top of itself and leave it there for, say, 30 minutes or so, when you come back and pull it apart, there may be brown spots where that meat was touching each other that quickly because you're taking away the oxygen at certain places. And if you leave it alone, a lot of times it will, what we refer to from a meat processing standpoint, it will rebloom, if you will, like a flower. It will, it will rebloom in the spring. But in all seriousness, a lot of times those color defects, if you will, aren't permanent.
Okay.
In some ways, they may be. But so quality of the shelf life by appearance is not necessarily have anything to do with the true shelf life and safety of that product.
Okay. Are there any, simple touch or smell things that people can not really?
No.
Wow.
Unfortunately, they're not. And, that's why color is such a very important topic with fresh meat.
Okay.
Because consumers are driven by that color. And I can tell you this all day long, but if it doesn't look good, you're simply not going to buy it.
You're probably not going to buy it.
And I'm not anybody to tell you to change your mind.
Well, there was another, and again, I'm just going into my own personal stuff here. I have had, fresh cut pork that I literally watched the butcher slice package give to me, and I get it home, and the next day it smells kind of funky, but it cooks up fine. Is that just surface stuff? Or?
It could be. It could be. You might need to check the temperature of your refrigerator at home.
Okay. All right.
It's always good to do that. Most home refrigerators maybe aren't cold enough, and so certainly we want that.
Where do you want them?
Somewhere between 34 and 38 degrees would be ideal.
Okay.
34 might be a little cold for some of your food products.
Ours is running about 37.
That's perfect.
Pretty steady.
That's
okay,
perfect.
good.
Right in that temperature range.
That's great.
Less than 40 for sure.
Okay. All right. Sometimes the local butcher will have much better prices on things than a supermarket. And yet on other things, it'll be a lot higher. What's good? Is that just, I don't know, what is that, supply? Or
It is supply. A lot of grocers, because they're buying in large volumes, that's how they're able to reduce the cost of something that maybe costs more. It also depends on what that local consumer wants. And so if you have a high demand for steaks, the local economics is going to drive the price of those steaks up.
Yeah.
Combined with, you're talking about much smaller volumes in a local butcher shop as opposed to a chain grocery store, for instance.
Yeah.
And so those simple economics where something that may be cheaper or unique. You might have local butcher shops and markets that offer items that other stores do not. And that could be to try to serve that general area or region where they're trying to serve, and where the consumer base may be different.
I mean, I know our local, I'm out in Millheim, Penns Valley Meat Market.
Yeah.
Every week they have tri-tip.
They're fantastic.
I remember trying to find tri-tip down in Bucks County. I was driving miles to find it. It's every week he's got it. So that brings me to the next question, which is, are there cuts that maybe we should be looking at more that we're overlooking?
You know, it's interesting as a lot of the food channels and cooking channels that have inundated cable TV networks.
That's pretty well covered now.
It's very well covered, and you'll see consumer demand somewhat driven by that. You used to not be able to. So if the show
talks about hanger steak, all of a sudden everybody wants hanger steak.
Absolutely, and keep in mind there's only one.
Right.
So hanger steak, skirt steak, flank steak, all of those what used to be not high-end cuts are now high-end cuts.
Yeah.
Short ribs, very high demand.
Oh, right.
You used to not be able to get rid of brisket 30, 40 years ago, and now everybody wants the whole brisket to barbecue and experiment with, and either social media followings that are happening in the food realm or TV shows that are happening. They'll drive a lot of the demand by consumer just by.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back and edit out that tri-tip bit. I don't want
that. I see it. Well, tri-tip's a fantastic cut.
It really is.
And, there's a couple of cuts from the sirloin, tri-tip being one of them, and then the sirloin cap or picanha. That is popular in South America. That is, both of those they have fantastic flavor. They're nice and tender if they're cooked properly, not overcooked, and sliced properly.
I just last year got one of the I got a Kamado Joe.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and man, everyone is talking about the picanha. Everybody wants to get that on their rotisserie. I'm like, I've never heard of this.
Yeah, it's a fantastic cut of beef and great beef flavor, nice and tender cut.
Nice.
And don't over season it. That's the key, because those products have great flavor. But traditionally they would be very lightly seasoned, if at all. Maybe just some sea salt, and that's it.
Yeah. You know, I got to say, this is the thing that drives me crazy about cooking lately. I keep seeing people saying, all that guy uses is salt and pepper. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's right. This is one of the things that gets with the butcher block, and I'm sure you're teaching them this, but the way everything is so neatly packaged with the white paper. And I see the same thing. I know cheesemongers have competitions about this. Is that just economies, or is it looking good, or is there a science behind it?
Certainly, packaging is an important science within itself.
Okay.
But the butcher paper that we use to package most of our products, some products we actually vacuum seal. We have several vacuum sealers upstairs in our processing areas, and it just depends on what our goals are with the product type, and what type of product it is. If for some weird reason we would have product left over after a Friday meat sale. We're one of the few universities that still does a fresh meat sale, and that takes a lot of effort to do. But that butcher paper should be something that is not only does it look nice, it does provide a little bit of a freezer barrier. So if customers aren't going to use that immediately within 3 to 5 days after they purchase it here, they could stick that in the freezer, and that's going to provide a little bit of a freezer barrier, as opposed to, say, a styrofoam tray with just a plastic overwrap. That might look nice in a case, but that's certainly not meant to protect the product for freezing.
I have put some of your packages directly in the freezer, and everything's worked out great.
Yeah.
If I've got fresh meat that say something comes up and I have to leave home for a few days, what's the best way to wrap that for the freezer if I don't have a vacuum sealer?
So the best way to wrap that is to get a freezer paper or butcher paper. Typically that would have kind of a shiny side or a waxy side, and that's that barrier, and that's going to be what contacts the meat directly.
Okay.
To add even more barrier, you could wrap it in plastic film first.
Okay.
Try to get as much air out of that product. That's really the the air component is really what
that's what you're working on. Okay,
facilitates some of the freezer burn that we're worried about.
And what is it? Is it dehydration or?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
and you get ice crystals forming, and you get damage to the product, and it's not unsafe to eat. It's just it reduces the quality of the product.
Yeah.
And so you could have that plastic barrier and then wrap it pretty tightly, and just make sure that it's wrapped. I can't tell listeners how to wrap products, but I'm sure there's a lot of videos. Just
get it as
online.
tight as you can. Yes,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's a video for
everything. There's also a lot of videos of how to do it wrong. So.
All right. And as far as that goes, is a vacuum sealer a good buy?
It is a good buy.
Okay.
Those food savers are pretty economical. You certainly can't use normal vacuum seal pouches with that type of vacuum sealer, but there are some of the small chamber vacuum packagers are getting more affordable now. And you're seeing a lot of, I would say, more sports-related stores, chain-related stores start to carry some of that smaller pilot processing equipment.
Great.
And, vacuum sealer is just a great way that, in a 3 millimeter or 4 millimeter plastic pouch, that product's going to last in a freezer at 0 degrees or sub-zero for 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
So that if you're really worried about, with things costing more now, that's a great way to save a little bit of money on products that, I bought it at this price, and so next year when it's even more, I can.
I'm ready to go.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Put one of those on my Christmas list. One of the listeners, he was talking about the whole cured meats things, and he likes cured meats, but he's like, why does that even work?
Yeah.
How is this? You're fermenting beef? How is that even safe? How does that work? What's it doing?
Yeah, so fermentation and curing are two different activities. Okay. Curing would just simply be a means to preserve the product. It keeps the product to combat food pathogens. One of the main ones we're concerned about when we cure products is botulism. And so Clostridium botulinum is the food pathogen that we're concerned about. They produce botulinum toxin. And now we've pretty much gotten rid of it in our food products, and so we use that toxin to do things like inject it into our face.
Right.
But in all seriousness, that's typically a different type of botulinum toxin, as opposed to the food neurotoxin that we're concerned about. It goes back to basic food safety. Keep cold items cold, keep hot items hot, and don't let food items sit around on the counter at room temperature for an extended period of time. After something's cooked, use it hot or get it into the refrigerator to chill it down as fast as possible.
Okay.
So curing items helps to prevent some of that toxin from ever happening, and just helps to preserve that product from not only a color standpoint, but also a food safety standpoint.
Okay. And smoking, where does that fit in?
Smoking is also an antimicrobial.
And how's that working?
Smoking is another form of food preservation that we inherited pre-refrigeration.
Yeah.
So curing smoking was all a way to help preserve meat items. If you think back into the 1800s or longer, we didn't have ice boxes and refrigerators.
Right, you had to do something.
And so smoking was a great way to not only add color and flavor to that product. Through the process of smoking, it maybe dehydrated the product a little bit.
Okay.
It helped to preserve that meat product and keep it longer.
Okay, and then the fermentation.
Yeah, so
we were talking about like salami and bologna
so salamis or your traditional Lebanon bolognas. Those are typically fermented meat products where they may taste a little tangy or a little sweet, and that's because of the good bacteria that we are putting into those products.
Okay.
That science, if you will, of fermentation, not all bacteria produce an acid. For instance, when you create a beer or a wine or something, those bacteria are producing alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so you see, when you see fermentation from a grain standpoint, you might have alcohol being produced or bubbles being produced from that alcohol. We don't want that to happen in a meat product.
Oh, right.
And so we need to make sure that we are choosing the specific type of microorganisms that produce lactic acid inside the meat product. And that typically happens at a set temperature. That temperature is determined by the type of what we call starter culture or bacteria that we use. Then we give that bacteria an energy source, generally in the form of sugar.
Oh, okay.
So it ferments sugar and creates lactic acid.
And all this stuff just gets blended into
It gets slowly blended in naturally into the product during the first 10 hours to up to 3 days, depending on the type of culture that you're using and the type of the temperature at which you're fermenting.
Okay.
So.
And how do you know when it's done?
That's a great question.
And I ask because I've had like amateur bolognas that were definitely not done.
Yeah. So that starts with a clean surface.
Okay.
So if you don't have good food safety practices to begin with, you're going to get potentially other things growing in that product that you don't want happen, and that's not a good thing. So it's not sterile by any means, because if it was sterile, we wouldn't get fermentation. But it is clean and it is sanitized. Okay. And so that helps to get rid of the bacteria that we don't want in that product. Typically, during a salami manufacturing, it's not only fermented, it's also dried. Okay. And so that would be at maybe a little bit cooler temperature, say 50 degrees, 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
This is what the hanging is for?
That's what the hanging is for. Okay. And that's just allowing moisture to slowly migrate from the center of the product and then be evaporated in the form of water vapor from the surface. Okay. And so you need temperature, humidity control, and then air velocity control. Oh. You don't want too slow of an airspeed because you might get mold formation. Unless you want mold formation. Right. And then we're going to choose which mold we want to grow on the surface of that product and make sure we put just that mold on the surface. Okay. And some products, all your traditional Italian salamis, especially in certain regions of Italy, would have that nice white bloom penicillium mold on the surface of that product.
Now, is that a flavor thing or
it's not?
It's an aesthetic.
It's more of it's actually a biopreservative if you want to think of it that way. Okay. So it helps. It's kind of like a T-shirt in the summertime that has a wicking effect. So that mold acts to help slowly wick moisture to the surface. Okay. It controls the speed at which we lose water more efficiently. It certainly has a nice color appearance to it, but it really doesn't add flavor. When we go to package that product, we're going to take all that mold off the surface of the product. But if you don't want mold, you need to make sure that the airflow is at a speed where mold is not attaching to the surface of that product and growing, but it's not so high that you are over drying the surface of the product. In that case, you're going to do what's called case hardening of salami. Oh. And it basically rots from the inside out because you have over-dried the surface. Moisture is no longer allowed to migrate to the outside. And so too high of a fan speed is worse than too low, and you get some minor mold formation, in my opinion. So.
That's wow. Okay. I'm sorry, it's just much more complicated than I thought.
It is, and that's why you should really get some education associated with if you're trying to do this at home, because you certainly don't want to make anybody sick from making products like that. So
same listener, a question that fascinated me: I don't know any way to put it. Different sausage traditions in different regions of Europe, are they based more on processing or spices, or do you have anything on that? Okay, good.
Yes. Some of it's just simply based off of what they had. Okay. But prior to a lot of global trade, if you will, where you could get something that's grown in other parts of the world, we shouldn't have any spices here at all because spices don't grow here in the United States. But in all seriousness, a lot of the flavor profiles and traditions behind what products were made had to do with maybe the local economy as well as the spices and seasonings that were available to that particular area, whether it was pork, beef, or lamb also had to do with what livestock were maybe prevalent in particular areas.
Climate, soil.
Yeah. So, for instance, most of your Northern European or Germanic style sausages, there are a lot of beef in those products because there is more beef in that part of the world than maybe in Eastern Europe or Asia or Southern Europe. Italy, for instance, there's a lot more swine than there are cattle.
Yeah, I'm thinking Spain is lamb.
Absolutely.
And,
yeah. And France, you have a lot of lambs. When you get more towards Asia and the Middle East, you have a lot more sheep and goats involved in so you would have products from those types of species. And in other cultures, you can't eat swine.
Yeah.
So it boils down to where in the world it is, what's available, as well as certain religious sects and religious beliefs associated with what products are made and how those different sausages come about.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fascinating, really.
It really is. I mean, there's a whole geographical and cultural component to everything.
Yeah, and that's one thing that drew me to this discipline. I'm constantly learning.
Yes.
And especially as you travel around the different parts of the country or even different countries, you're constantly learning about new items or ways to, as we would say, Americanize them. and they would probably think that we're bastardizing them, but in all seriousness, it's a great education for me.
That's great. That's great. I hadn't even thought about that. So finally, wrap up the butcher block. Again, people told me, okay, I've been once. I'll confess here. I went once, and everyone told me, you got to get there early and get in line. And
that's true.
We got there early, and holy crap, I think we were 16th. Wow. Yeah, it was half an hour before we even get in the door. What runs out first?
Our steaks.
Okay.
We try to dry age our beef that comes from our beef farms. If it's in the case, it was born here, raised here, processed here on campus. And so
that's just the beef or everything?
Everything.
Everything.
And so that's our beef, pork, and lamb that you would see in the case. That's all, again, born here, raised here, processed here, all on campus. Students definitely involved in all aspects of that product, from the live animal side all the way to the meat product. And so that's one thing that's very unique about the product. Some customers come because of that. Mm-hmm. Some come because it's at Penn State.
Oh, okay, sure.
Some come because they believe it's a better product or tastes better. And everybody has a unique scenario as to why that would happen. So our steaks would certainly go first. We dry age our beef, which is the process of allowing that carcass to hang under refrigeration for 14 to 21 days minimum.
So you're losing water? Losing
water. It's certainly developing flavor and hopefully helping to naturally tenderize that product.
Oh, okay.
And so that's some of the key differences with a dry aged product versus something that is not.
Okay.
So it's a very unique flavor, texture, and in some instances, aroma. So part of that flavor perception is aroma as well.
Uh-huh. Say it's, I don't know, 1:30 in the afternoon. What's left?
It really depends on the Friday. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I've been here 11 years now, and it baffled me that the crowd that's here on a Friday for a home football game is from all over. Certainly you have recreational vehicles come in on a Thursday night before a home football game by droves from all over the country. And that really changes the demographic of who our customers are on that Friday, whereas a lot of the local personnel will stay away. And I understand why.
That's why I have home games marked on my calendar. Yeah.
So this was always a first come, first serve store, simply because we just simply don't have the employee and staff to be able to do anything different. We also don't have the volume to be able to do, online purchases or box purchases, and it works quite well. Not everybody's always satisfied. We certainly don't like to not have satisfied customers, but you ask what's available in the afternoon. We still might have a lot of product available by 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay.
Certainly all of our processed products are always available simply because because they have more shelf life. It's not fresh meat. We can make those weeks in advance. Yeah. We also produce a lot of product for the creamery for them to sell. Okay. And so our snack sticks, summer sausage, anything that is what we consider those convenience items are always available. Our sausages, ground beef, those are typically always available. Roast would be available.
Steaks are tough.
Steaks are tough.
Okay.
But you still might have and lamb would be tough as well. Let me rephrase that because our lamb is not tough.
I was thinking that as you said that word.
Our product is not tough, but it may be difficult.
Difficult is a better word.
To purchase.
Okay. Wow, I have so many more questions. We're just going to have to do this again at some time. Thank you.
That would be fantastic.
Thank you so much. This has been educational, and I'm really looking forward to running this one. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right, take care.
You too.
I might have to grill this weekend. That's really got my juices flowing. I have some podcast news. I know I keep promising merchandise on a new website. The house project has slowed me down, and now my work with What's Brewing PA is starting up again. If you haven't watched What's Brewing, by the way, you should. It's a fun show about beer in Pennsylvania, which you're obviously interested in if you're listening to this. It's available on YouTube. Just search What's Brewing PA. I know some of you are watching it because people keep walking up to me at Wegmans and State College and saying, "Hey, you're that What's Brewing guy." Yes, I am. And thank you. It's a busy time. This week I'm meeting with the sponsor I mentioned last episode to iron out the details on that. I'm also meeting with my agent and my editor next week about a possible new book project, a third whiskey book. Plus, a big hello to my fellow WSOV listeners. WSOV is the Sound of the Valleys, our local radio station here in Millheim, at 101.7 on your pretty local FM radio dial, and streaming worldwide at WSOV.org. They've decided to broadcast Seen Through a Glass on the station. This episode is the first one, and I'm proud and excited to be here. That's going to let a lot more people listen to the podcast. Exciting stuff. If you are listening on WSOV, there are over 30 more episodes of Seen Through a Glass to enjoy, including a Millheim episode and a Nittany Valley episode. They're available at seenthroughaGlass.podbean.com. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Or you can find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Anyway, about the merchandise and website. I've got a purveyor for the merch picked out and a website address reserved. I'm meeting with my genius content creator daughter this weekend to design our first sticker and hash out what's going to be on the website. I'm looking forward to getting a lot done and hope to have something in your hands fairly soon. That's the show. Thanks to Dr. Jonathan Campbell for taking almost an hour to talk to me. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see him again some Friday morning soon at the Butcher Block, because I want some more of those excellent sausages, and I might have to get there early and grab some steaks. You'll find pictures for this episode on Instagram at STAG Podcast and on Facebook at Seen Through a Glass. If you'd like to toss a bit in my hat to keep the show going, please do consider the coffee button in my Instagram linktree and Twitter profile. Both are at Lou Bryson and at the Facebook page. And if you've already donated, thank you. In Pennsylvania, it is illegal to catch fish by any body part but the mouth. One assumes the law refers to the fish's mouth. Next episode? Well, I'd like to do that town profile, right? I mean, that's the plan. I guess we'll find out in 2 weeks. Until then, thanks for listening. This is Lou Bryson on Seen Through a Glass from the smack dab center of the Keystone State.